Hey guys, welcome to another OrmsTV video. Now we finally got our hands on the brand new Fuji X-H2S.
Yeah, and today we're going to run you guys through this camera in a little bit of detail, going through the specs, the features, what we liked about it, how we feel about it. So we took it out, we shot with it a little bit, tested all the big headline features that Fuji has crammed in here. I'm going to take you guys through it.
Now first up we have to talk about the sensor. It's a brand new sensor from Fuji, 26 megapixel stacked BSI. Now the stacked sensor is going to give you better readout and a faster readout, and also it's going to help you reduce the rolling shutter in video mode.
Indeed, and that's actually very, very noticeable out of this camera right off the bat, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. The big thing about the sensor as well, as Andre said, is the speed of readout, and that coupled with the new processor that they've got in there that Fuji claims is as much as 3 times faster than the processor fitted to the X-T4, gives it quite a phenomenal burst rate out of this little camera. So with the electronic shutter, you're looking at a burst rate running up to 40 frames per second with continuous autofocus throughout. Mechanical shutter drops you down to 15 frames per second, still very respectable numbers.
Now this brand new sensor and processor from Fuji is not only giving you better speed, but really good dynamic range. 14 stops acclaimed from Fuji, which is the first for them. And your ISO range you can expect from 160 up to 12,800, but you can expand it to 51,200.
Yeah, so what you also get in here is a very familiar IBIS system, very similar to what was in previous cameras, but with a compatible lens, you're now getting up to 7 stops IBIS. So very much bringing it in line with kind of industry standard, if I can put it that way. And again, encouraging to see from Fuji.
Now a huge revamp on this model from Fuji is going to be their autofocus system. This is where a lot of attention to detail has been put into this camera. Now Fuji has went the same route as other companies has gone, where they've put in deep learning AI technology in this, so that's a bonus. You're still shooting on 425 points, but the system is way more advanced. You can shoot up to about -7 stops in low light conditions, so that's a real good bonus. In terms of the algorithms, this can register quite a lot of different things. You might have to fill in some of my gaps where I leave it out. But it's cars, motorbikes, trains, humans, dogs, cats, horses.
Birds.
Birds.
Yeah. It's a very similar system to what we're seeing in Canon, Nikon, Sony, all of those guys implementing. And yes, Fuji's a little bit late to the party, but it's good that they're getting there.
Now we've said autofocus is a huge revamp on this model, but the X-H2S is going to be aimed at the video guys out there, especially the pro video crowd, and that's where a lot of the beefier specs is on this model, right?
Yeah, so the specs are quite numerous, and we'll just run through sort of the key ones out there, and the rest will just run on the screen because it gets quite lengthy. But essentially the camera will do 6.2K full sensor readout at up to 30 frames per second. You can also do 4K DCI and UHD, also full sensor readout up to 60p. Then if you do want a more slow-mo effect, you can go 4K at 120 or 1080p at 240, but that is a baked-in slow-mo, so a baked-in frame rate, and that's not necessarily great, you know, if you want to be able to edit that, but in terms of usable output, it's perfectly fine. The big downside there though is that in addition to the APS-C size sensor, if you're shooting in that slow-mo, you are getting an additional 1.29 crop applied on top of that. So you do lose a lot of the width within your lenses. Now, in addition to those specs, you also can record in ProRes internally, and that's going to be a 422 HQ file. You can then also record standard 422 10-bit or 422 LT. And the main codec that you're going to use for internal recording is going to be your H.265 codec. Now in terms of external recording, so if you're pushing your video feed out via the HDMI port, you can do ProRes externally, so it's ProRes RAW, and you can do Blackmagic RAW externally as well.
So when we look at the body externally, it's not going to look like your X-T3 or X-T4, but it kind of actually resembles the GFX range.
It
right?
does. It does. It basically looks like a mini GFX 100S.
And I actually do like this top screen. It's really cool to see that pushed into this model. You do have your traditional modal. You have various customized mode buttons. As we know with Fuji, you can remap a lot of them. And in terms of ports, you've got your USB-C. That's pretty standard these days with most cameras launched. And full-size HDMI, which is going to help you a lot with that video output files that you just mentioned. You have your traditional mic input and obviously headphone output.
And crucially, it's finally 3.5 modes.
To process the speed of not only 40 frames per second, but also these crazy video formats that we just mentioned, they have also added the brand new CF Express Type B card and also the classic standard SD card.
Yeah, so the other thing that was really nice for me on this unit was the addition of an OLED viewfinder. Now, this viewfinder is a 5.7 million dot viewfinder, if I'm not mistaken, and it'll refresh at up to 120 Hertz, which is really nice. If you really wanted to, you could vlog with this,
or shoot funny angles.
Shoot funny angles, but at the end of the day, it is nice to have that full articulation. It's a bit of a pity that they didn't include a tilt outwards so that you could clear your ports if you are articulating. But other than that, much of a muchness. In terms of actually shooting with this camera, we had our hands on it for about a day or two now, shooting with it, filming with it, seeing what it's all about. And I have some strong opinions about it, and some of it's good and some of it definitely needs some work. But I'd like to start off with the stills quality, specifically regarding the new stacked sensor. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because the megapixel count is the same as what you have in the existing X-T4. And that makes it tricky to recommend this camera for a pure stills user. Now, at first glance, you might go, okay, you have the stacked sensor, so that is going to give you better image quality. Not really. The image quality that you're getting out of this is very, very similar to the X-T4. Saying that, I know it's sounding like I'm being negative about it, but the image quality is good. Like, it's still a Fuji. It still has that incredible color science. You still have the ability to apply their film simulations, just like you do on all the other cameras. And it's still amazing. The black and whites are crisp, clean, punchy, exactly what you expect. The color is nice and vibrant. The skin tones are absolutely bang on. It is still beautiful Fuji color, and there's nothing wrong with that. It is some of the best out there. But don't go into this expecting a massive leap in image quality. Where you are going to get a significant leap, though, is in the speed of this unit, specifically on the burst speed. And Andre shot quite a lot of skateboarding with this, and I want you to take us through some of that.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you kind of nailed it on the head, is that when someone is shooting sport, whether it being skateboarding, athletics, the tracking is going to be really good. Fuji has definitely stepped up their game when you compare it to any of their other cameras. The autofocus system is a huge revamp. And not only that, you're getting 40 frames per second, which is kind of, in many cases, it's like unnecessary.
Yeah.
And sometimes even better to go 15 frames just to prevent any funny sort of distorted look and feel to the images when you're shooting in electronic shutter mode.
I want to touch on that autofocus a little bit more. So when we started shooting with this, we did find it a little bit tricky to get the tracking to lock on, specifically on the edges of the frame. But admittedly, that was us not really knowing the settings, because the menu is quite a bit different to what it is in previous models.
Completely revamped menu.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of tweaking required, so Fuji helped us out with that, and now that we know how it works, it is actually really good. Saying that, though, when you are shooting at the 40 frames per second mark, it does miss now and then. So you'll find that you're getting 3 or 4 shots that's pin sharp, then you're getting 1 or 2 that's a little bit soft, then it's sharp again. And that's something that we've seen in the past from other manufacturers as well, specifically in a first generation rollout, and then it gets fixed with firmware. And I think it's going to be the same over here. You know, nowadays autofocus is just software algorithms.
In terms of the video capabilities of this model, that's where a lot of the focus is going to lie on, and a lot of the upgrades is going to lie on this model. And something that stood out for me is definitely the F-Log2 in terms of the dynamic range that you're getting with this new stacked sensor. As you can see in this frame that we have in the skate park, there is so much shadow detail that you can pull back, and the same goes for the highlights. So that's a super nice thing that Fuji has added in this camera. I'm so happy that they finally have stacked sensor technology in their cameras, and the new F-Log2 is beautiful. As we know, Fuji colors is always the top for me.
Absolutely, and yes, rightly, that F-Log2 is phenomenal. It might be my new favorite log profile, and man, it's good to shoot in. And staying with that, in the video mode, the tracking autofocus works really well.
Yeah.
I dare say it works better than it does in stills, which is to be expected. Video is a little bit more natural for that type of tracking autofocus. It works well, it's smooth, it's crisp, it stays locked on. Now, when we do stay with the video and we look at the slow-mo within this, so we shot some 4K at 120, and then there's also some Full HD at 240. Now, yes, it is baked in, and you will see that the footage is not the clearest out there, and unfortunately that is a byproduct of that baked in slow-mo algorithm that gets used in a lot of cameras in this bracket. But the footage is very usable, very encouraging to see Fuji going into that bracket. In terms of video, it's good stuff.
In conclusion to our review of the Fuji X-H2S, there's a lot of positives from our side. We love the brand new stacked sensor. We love the speed capabilities of this in stills. We love the autofocus system that they've revamped. And the video output capabilities is a massive bonus, having that ProRes RAW out. So you can definitely see that they've kind of catered this more for the sort of professional videographer.
Yeah, you know, I couldn't agree with you more. Initially, when I got my hands on this camera, I kind of struggled with it, and I think you did as well.
Yeah.
We struggled to see where it fit in and what Fuji was trying to do here. But the more you use it, it kind of makes sense. You know, you get back into the swing of things, you get back into what Fuji is trying to achieve. And Fuji's been quiet for a couple of years. There's no two ways around it. They haven't really brought out much that's new, much that's innovative. And as a first relaunch, if I can put it that way, almost a re-entry into the market, I think this is excellent. It takes everything that Fuji is good at, everything that they've always done, and it just kind of amps it up. It modernizes. It brings it in line with what other players in the spectrum is doing. And that's important because Fuji needs to compete on level field there. Fuji can't just be the outlier that has, you know, some film simulations and kind of like retro bodies. Yes, that's great, that's cool, it's amazing, that's what drew us to it originally. Yeah. But Fuji has to step up, and this definitely steps up. The video is phenomenal. It really is. There's no two ways around it. It is truly excellent. The speed of this camera, 40 frames per second, shooting with continuous autofocus, it's really, really good. Yes, the autofocus needs a little bit of tweaking, but it locks on, it stays locked on. Yes, it loses a little bit when you're running at the maximum frame rate, but that's okay because it can be improved. And yes, this camera is 100% aimed at a more video-centric market. That is a simple fact here. But at the same time, if you're coming from something that's older in Fuji's lineup, if you're coming from an XT1, an X-H1, an XT2, even an XT3, and you want to expand on the capabilities of that camera, and you want to supersede an XT4, this is kind of where you're going to go. If you come into this expecting traditional Fuji stills-focused performance, hold out for the XT5 that will inevitably come. But if you're looking for an all-rounder with a kind of serious video lean to it, good option.
Yeah, and I think that perfectly wraps up the video, and we hope to see you guys soon, and let us know in the comments below if you're interested in getting yourself the brand new Fuji X-H2S.
Yeah, and as always, if you enjoy the content that we put out, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us out a lot. And if you enjoyed this video, drop us a like. But then we'll see you guys next time.